that has just escaped me. Hopefully somebody...
Sustainable urban drainage scheme.
Absolutely. Small-scale interventions that can stop the flow into the combined sewage system that we have in Chester. And I'm pleased to say that the Forum has embraced that enthusiastically. Welsh Water provided us with 44 sites and said, go and look at them. And the Forum has banded together really enthusiastically to find ways of providing suds in that area in our city centre to try and stop rainwater, of which we are having more and more, from coming into the sewage system, thereby preventing the need for discharges into the river. So that's a very practical and local way that people feel that they're empowered and that they can do something that isn't so insurmountable that they feel lost and hopeless. So lots and lots of people write to me about nature depletion and their worries about the natural and situation in nature and biodiversity. Say that the lobbying that is organised by different organisations is really effective, and we see a lot of that coming through in the case work. But it's really important. It means that I go and speak in debates in Westminster Hall about bees, and it means that I go and talk about swifts. I actually am really passionate about swifts, and in terms when I was, and we make sure that on the planning committee that those interventions are made for any applications that come forward. But as the leader of a local authority with a major infrastructure development in the middle of the city, it meant that I could insist that as we were paying for it, we were going to put a Swift hotel in it, which we did. But also work with other landowners and building owners to make sure that they meet the biodiversity challenge. So I think local people can get a handle on natural issues, whereas they may find that the words climate emergency is beyond what their experience is. And as a politician, I feel it very much in my sort of remit to actually make it real and make it something that people feel they can actually do something about, however small their contribution, that it's valuable and it makes a difference. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you very much. I'm Jen Kelly, I'm Head of Sustainability at Chester Zoo. We are a leading global conservation and education charity, but we're also a conservation zoo, and our site in Chester welcomes over 2 million visitors every year, so we are the biggest tourist attraction outside of London. We've got a mission to prevent extinction, and we're really passionate about creating a future where nature can survive and thrive. I think what we see in terms of the climate and nature crisis is that these two things absolutely have to go hand in hand. Sam was saying, the stat that I was going to bring up around 1 million species facing extinction, and the UK has the lowest biodiversity of any of the G7 nations. That is a really poor record for us to be facing, and something that our conservation zoo is tackling head on in the conservation work that we do. And from the education side of things, the most powerful thing that we do is to connect people with nature. So that education piece, empowering people to live more sustainably for the benefit of nature, and also working with other entities as well in collaboration, because we know that we cannot do this alone. If we're going to tackle these crises together, that has to be through collaboration. So some of the practicalities of our role: we run a large business, so we have some pretty unique experience in the environmental NGO sector, in that we are also a very large site with our own environmental impacts. And what's really exciting about that is we have our own practical experience of trying to deliver against government policy that comes through, and understanding some of the challenges that faces. So we have that we are pushing forwards. Let that subside a little bit. And Sam mentioned the Nature Recovery Corridor, which is another initiative that is led by Chester Zoo, a really successful local nature recovery project that has set the zoo in as the at the heart of coordinating the actions that benefit nature. And I really liked Sam's phrasing about being guided by conservation experts, and I think that is one of the key things that we need to see from any government trying to tackle both the nature and the climate crisis together, is that we have entities in this country who are there and willing to help, and have the expertise to support government to drive forward meaningful change. I think one thing that's really, really important is about meaningful action on climate blindness to emergencies as well. So we do see a lot of sort of offsetting and looking at nature and climate markets as a means to sell credits for damage that's happening elsewhere. But actually what we really need is that restoration piece, and we need to protect and enhance the nature that we already have, and looking to give people access to nature as well. So giving people access to nature-rich green spaces, not just green spaces, but spaces that work for nature as well. So bringing communities into that process, giving them that. Things we saw through COVID is the importance of green space to people, and that has held firm. That has set nature and access to green space in people's hearts, and I think that is a really powerful tool to build upon. The other thing I would say is that, having been at Party Conference for a couple of days now, it's incredible to see the change in tone and the energy and the excitement around net zero and the climate crisis. That is an incredible shift from what we might have seen only a few years ago. We need to build that same excitement and that profile around nature, and that our approach to net zero cannot only be looking at decarbonising energy. That climate crisis is a really broad sphere of interventions, and nature-based solutions are at the heart of that, and building nature into both our response to both the climate and the biodiversity crisis is absolutely essential. Thank
you. Thank you, Jen. And now Katie White, Executive Director of WWF.
Thank you, Huel, and thank you, Sarah and Chester Zoo hosting. Thank you, Sam and Jen. I was ticking off my points as I was going through and going, oh no, we said the same thing. We said the same thing. But in terms of seriousness, we do work closely with Chester Zoo, as we do with everyone. WWF is the largest environmental organisation in the world, operating in over 100 different countries. And in the UK, is part of the conversation. Earlier this year, we co-produced the Wild Isles documentary that was on the BBC, the second most watched factual programme after the coronation. Over 10 million people watched it. Had amazing feedback. As we've heard, people in the UK love nature, absolutely love it. We fall in love with it. But the statistics are grim, absolutely grim. With the UK, we're the most nature depleted, one of the most nature depleted countries in the entire world, and we are bottom of the G7. That is not a statistic to be proud of. And unfortunately, the context globally is even worse in terms of, this horrific statistic from WWF, which haunts me, is that since 1970, and I'm not looking around the room making any judgments, but I'm sure some of us saw that year, 69% of our nature has been lost. 69%. I mean, that is quite a phenomenal statistic within the lifetime of some of the people in this room. So just to sort of do this, so I think, we heard as well from Keir today, we did hear about this decade of renewal. I think, that spoke to a lot of us, that decade of renewal. And what myself and the other panelists are saying is that the nature recovery and nature restoration has to be at the heart of that decade of renewal. leading on the climate change planetary boundary. Like, it's well overdue, and I'm really glad that we're going to lead on that net zero race. But there are other planetary boundaries. You know, we've heard around the water crisis. That's something that's definitely captured the imagination in terms of, but there are other boundaries, and we need to make sure that we're working with nature in order to do that. So I guess from WWF's perspective, we're as well thinking, how does that practically look? We've had a good Mother Nature is shouting at us at the same time. You know, in the UK, we've had the Climate Change Act. It's been a framework legislation that we led on. It's been replicated in, I think, over 100 countries now in the world, that looked at saying there are boundaries on climate change. We think actually we could do with something similar for nature. And at WWF, we talk about this triple challenge. We talk about the challenge of nature restoration. We talk about the challenge of climate change and the challenge of food security. But we would frame it as nutritional security, because unfortunately some of that food is being fed to cows and cars, and land management is going to be absolutely key. And right now it's somewhat of a wild west out there. So what we'll be calling for is for, if there is to be a future Labour government, which I think many of us are hoping for, that there will be, you know, nature will be at the heart of it. Framework to tackle, to set out what those planetary boundaries are and make sure we've got the policies to deliver on it. Thank you very much.
In a moment, I'm going to ask Dan, our Mayor from the West of England, to give us a contribution. But thank you, Dan, for joining us. I know there's so many things that politicians have to do at party conferences. One of the things I'd like you to touch on, if you don't mind, is as a politician, particularly as a politician who's running a combined authority and has some oversight over many things and places, is a bit about how you do the joining up. Because I think you can feel from what you didn't hear, but what we've heard, that part of the challenge is to give people a way of understanding the action that they can do and that their communities can do. And sometimes that's setting a bigger picture of what the mayor doing. So it'd be great to hear from you on that sort of overview sense. I'm sure you've got some other things to say, because it's something I know you're interested in.
Thank you. Well, first of all, Katie, apologies for coming away. Speaking is nothing worse than that. I apologise for putting you in that position. Okay, well, look, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Norris. I am Mayor of the West of England. That includes the great city of Bristol, the World Heritage City of Bath, and some beautiful countryside around its north Somerset and South Gloucestershire. And famous people who were born in that region are J.K. Rowling, who I went to school with, Mary Berry in Bath, who I didn't go to school with, and Banksy, who I might have gone to school with. I don't know who he is. So look, it's a fantastic place. Do come there, spend loads of money. Now I've done my job, I can carry on and answer the questions. Okay, look, joined up. I used to be a government minister in the last Labour government, one of my special advisors. The truth is, politics has moved on in terms of policy a long way. Things have just changed so much in a relatively short time, 13 years, but actually lots have changed. And it seems very clear to me as Mayor of the West of England that it's very unwise, inefficient, ineffective for me to introduce any policy that's just a single strand to it. So what I'm always looking at is to bring things together so that I can deal with more than one issue for the public at the same time. And one of the things that I have done, and some of you may have heard, some of you may not, but I have introduced something called birthday buses. Birthday buses is free transport in the whole of my region, over 700 square miles, I think it is, 1.4 million people entitled to use the bus for free in the month of their birthday as often as they like, to go anywhere within the region. And there are several reasons for that. The first one is obviously that I want to deal with the climate emergency, which I believe is an emergency. It was an emergency when I was an environment minister 13 plus years ago. It's even more of an emergency now. Anyone who doesn't get the data is crazy, frankly. It was clear in the past, it's even crystal clear now, and I get scared when I see that we have these exceptional temperatures and situations and weather events all the time. It is just terrible. So we have got to do something cars less often. Doesn't mean they shouldn't use cars at all. I'm not getting into anti-car stuff. What I think is, though, that I have to provide a really good option for people to use cars less often. Birthday buses is part of that, because the idea of it is it lasts a whole month, of course. Now, in other parts of the country and in other parts of the world, people have done something similar for a day or maybe a weekend, and it's been successful for that day or weekend, but it didn't embed the behavior, it didn't stay. And what I know from all the research in terms of business and other things is that if you make a change for about 30 days or more, you tend to stick with that change. So this is what birthday bus is about more than anything, is behavior change. But it's also about recognition, hence the multi-policy thing. It's also about the recognition that there's a cost of living crisis that is really scary for an awful lot of people. And in my region, buses tend to be used by the poorest in our communities, not exclusively, but tends to be the case. And I want to help them. So they are already straight away able to get 1/12 of their annual bus fares back in effect, because there's a free month that they can travel in. Also cost my economy £300 million a year in congestion. I want to get my economy moving. I want businesses to be successful. So getting that congestion down through birthday buses is also a help. And there's also lots of air pollution that kills 300 people in my region prematurely every year. And again, I want to deal with that. But the other thing, these modern days, especially as we move into artificial intelligence and rapid change in so many ways, can afford to be like a snapshot that you start a policy and you leave it go and hope it works. Birthday buses works on the basis that you get given a card, you can use that card to travel free in that whole month, and it collects data about where you've gone and a bit about you, so that I and my team can work out how we improve that service over time. Because to just do something as a one-off or not to collect the information is very foolish nowadays. You've got to improve, you've got to get, because frankly, some things in birthday buses won't work. And I need to know as much about that as the things that I hope will be successful. So that's what I think is important. So in terms of what Hugh has asked, joined up thinking, I think now for all politicians, but certainly Labour politicians, keen to genuinely make as rapid improvements as we can in the context of a very tough financial situation, need to multi-policy. And birthday buses is how I've interpreted it in my area.
Thank you, Dan. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you for some questions to put to the panel. But before I do that, I want them to think about something they'd like you to take away. There's 70, 80 people in this room. You're all committed to something. You're all committed to nature, climate action. So what is it we can, in a sense, put your way to help you do something practical about the challenge? Something called Labour Coast Country. And one of the things that we think will be important and increasingly important, that's been touched on a couple of times, certainly that sense of accessing some oversight of your own local green spaces. So we think it's really important that the Labour Party engages with, strengthens and reforms town and parish councils. They are the nearest council to many people in England, and if we get them to work more effectively, that will also help restore nature in places. So that's my little proposition. I've actually got another one to give everybody one more moment to think about their call for action to you before I take your questions. And that is, I mean, this might sound an odd thing to say, but how many of you know a member of Parliament or a parliamentary candidate well enough to talk to them about nature? Go and find at least one more person you know well enough to do that, because those of you that do know these people, you probably appreciate their jobs are possibly the hardest jobs in the world. I don't get very much thanks for doing them, and the challenge that we face is so much more important than many of the immediate challenges that they will get in their post bag, and they need people like you to support them, to think about the today and the tomorrow and the week after. So all of you can do that job. Find and be friendly and supportive too. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Sam, if it's okay. What would your call for action be to this final meeting?
You've really put me on the spot there, Hugh, because there's so much that people can do, from the small to the large. I do it certainly focuses the work that I've been doing to hear from constituents who are asking me constantly, actually, to take action, to speak, to visit. I met Katie earlier on because constituents had asked me to go and meet her at the stall. So I suppose in a way it's engage with your elected representatives and make sure that and hold them to account for it. That's an experience I have now, but it's something that I would agree with. I think I'm quite interested in your idea about town and parish councils, that there isn't a great deal of appetite outside for new or more politicians. However, I am a great believer in subsidiarity, which is where decision making is decision taking is put in the right place. And currently, I think government decides too many things. So I would suggest that devolution is a really, really important factor in certainly decision taking about environmental and nature-based activities. So I would support you in that, but whether you
Thank you. Jen?
Well, I'm going to be cheeky like you, Huel, and suggest 2 actions. So the first would be come and visit us at Chester Zoo and come and see the incredible work that we do. Sneak that one in there. And the second thing I would say is asking everybody to take away a thought about how you can build consideration of nature into everything you do alongside the climate crisis. This isn't going to be a set of crises that are solved through environmental NGOs or environmentally minded people. This is a whole societal shift that we're facing here. It's got to be embedded into everything we do.
Thank you. Katie?
I'm ticking up again. I would say fall in love with the planet. I think actually, if you protect, you look after the things you love the most, and I think as well, it will look after you. There's nothing more restorative when you're having a horrible day than to go out into nature. So I think it's a restorative thing for us. But if we fall in love with the planet, it will drive us, incentivize us, and heal us at the same time.
Thank you. Dan?
Why we're here. Just to go as an aside, devolving is a good thing, but the devolution that I am impacted by as a regional mayor is really been not true devolution. It hasn't been taking much power away from Westminster and Whitehall or resource. What it's been tending to do is which builds up great resentment by them for a regional mayor, and we need to do something about that situation. So what we want is true devolution that gives resource but genuine power. I have a weird constitution because the Tories, in creating combined authorities, basically bribed councils with loads of money to agree to be there, and they asked in return a sort of safeguard of things that are often needing unanimous votes, would you believe, from all the council leaders, which is not so bad if you're in Greater Manchester or Merseyside where there's lots of Labour support. But if you're where I am and there's different parties that are involved that make it up, you only need one of them to scupper your best laid plans. So what I've made my plea to Keir and the team is that when we're doing devolution, as I hope we will be doing, and it sounds like we are going to be doing, if you are going to give money to combined authorities, give them to the mayor in person rather than the combined authority. Then I don't have to get votes from Tories and Liberals to do what I want to do. And I know it's not terribly on message to say this, but the Lib Dems were in coalition with the Tories for the first 5 years. I don't trust them.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for joining us, Ruth. I won't put you straight on the spot because that's not particularly fair, and it will give the audience a chance to put some propositions out and in front of us. So I'm going to take three questions, and I've seen 3 women. I'm going to start with the lady in the red. It's always good to wear a colour that's obvious to even colourblind people. The lady in the green and the lady in the white. Is there a mic wandering around? Yes, there is.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to say who you are and if you represent anything? Fire away.
Thank you. I'm Judy Snowball. I'm a Cheshire East councillor. I'm also an accredited badger vaccinator for Cheshire badger vaccination program, which seeks to support both our natural wildlife and our largest predator and a creature that has been with us since the Ice Age, as well as our farmers against the frequent breakdowns of TB. We look to try and offer an alternative to the cull, and also a way for both sectors, wildlife, their supporters, farmers, their herds, to find their way out of this crisis. We've seen our funding from DEFRA and certainly reduce substantially, and we're worried about the future. Other vaccination projects across the country are worried about the future. I'm hoping for a guidance to the fact that a future Labour government will prioritise badger vaccination and wildlife-friendly policies that do work for all, and that a future Labour government will increase funding and vaccination profile.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. Lady at the front in the green, please. So Ruth, I might start with you for the answering of the questions. You don't have to answer them all.
My name's Helen Rowe. I
Hello,
wrote
Helen.
a book called Eliminating Poverty in Britain. Came out last week. There's a big chapter in there.
What's
Obviously,
your book called, Helen? Say that again.
Eliminating Poverty in Britain.
Okay.
And there's a chapter on the green agenda, because I don't think you can deal with the green agenda without dealing with poverty. Mayor, one of the things I thought and generally hasn't been talked about is the concept of reuse. And reducing waste, because if you want space for nature, then we need to stop chucking stuff out. I volunteer at a local exchange project for children's clothes and shoes and toys and books in Tower Hamlets, and I'd like to see that as a national system, but I think the mayors could really help. So that's an idea for you.
And you are?
My name's Amy Wood.
Amy.
Just a member here from Shipley constituency. My question is about housing. So there's been some big announcements today about house building across the country, new towns, etc. And I guess my question is, how do we make sure that nature and the climate emergency are aligned with those plans, rather than just building houses in places which might be protected and otherwise?
Thank you. I'm going to start with you, Ruth, if that's okay. Then I'm going to go to you, Dan, because there's, in a sense, a particular question in your direction. And once upon a time, we did both used to work on waste policy. Then, as the other politician, Samantha, I'm going to come to you, and then I'm going to come to, well, the experts. No, that's a terrible thing for me to say. Stop. Ruth, does that mic? Are you going to use that mic?
Is this one working? Can you hear me? Excellent. Okay. My apologies for being late. It's one of those days where, you have to go everywhere to be everywhere. And obviously, I've been listening to Steve Reed, our new Shadow Secretary of State. He's just been speaking in the hall. So great to hear him being so proactive and positive. Let me start off with the badgers. And we've got some good news on the badgers because, yes, we want to follow the science. That's where we're going in terms of badgers. Much on the farming side. I'm on the sort of the wildlife side. So we have an interesting tension between us, but it's really, really important that we follow the science. And you've mentioned funding, and it is a massive issue because unless you fund the vaccine programs, we ain't going to eradicate TB. So it's really, really important that we do that. So we will, when we get into government, we will be working with the DEFRA officials who are very much more open to speaking to us now, funnily enough. They're very keen to be working with us. But certainly as far as vaccinations, yes, vaccinations. We're doing it in Wales. We will do it across the rest of the UK. Thank you for that. In terms of, somebody mentioned about the funding, the Environment Agency, I mean, basically the Environment Agency has been depleted of funding and money, resources, everything over the last 13 years. It's been stripped back to the bone. Well, beyond the bones, amputations, in fact. So we need to make sure that we can have, if we're going to make legislation, it needs to be enforced. And that's the important thing here. If you're going to have something, there's no point having a paper exercise. We've got to have that the Environment Agency has to have teeth, and we will make sure that it does there. The green agenda, the circular economy, reduce, reuse, recycle, a massive issue with us. And we are talking. I sit down with food packaging and the manufacturing industry. Every other week we are talking about how do we actually get this circular economy going. Extended polluter responsibility, EPR, deposit return schemes. These have been talked about, and this government's kicked them down the road for years. We've had 14 consultations, I think, on the deposit return scheme. It's ridiculous. So we need some action here, okay? And that's what we want to do here. We are talking to industry because they are the ones who accept that there is an issue. They're not, they want to take down their responsibilities. There is money in the pot from them. It's making sure we spend it in the right place. But it's also getting into the mindset. In Wales, for instance, obviously, put in to ensure that households could recycle their waste properly. We are the third best country in the whole of the world for doing this. So it's really important that the money has to go in first before you can actually get people to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing, and we just need to make sure we help them there. Shall I stop there because I'm in danger of withdrawing?
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for covering those. Dan, could I ask you to pick up on particularly on the waste one, but you might have a slight view on housing, given I suspect at least part of your portfolio covers that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, if I start off with, well, look, thank you very much for those lovely answers, because I wasn't sure what the answers were to some of those things because it's changed since I was an environment minister. But that's really, really good news. I think I'd simply say about mayors working together, yeah, it needs to happen, doesn't it? Because that will have more impact, more traction, more influence. And we are aware of that. And that's very much what the party's been talking about in the last few days and even longer, is about how we get more devolution, but more devolution that's meaningful. And that means working together. And in fact, I'm talking to my colleague mayors now about the possibility of us having staff that we share. So, if I have a particular issue and I'm doing very well with it, it makes sense that those staff go to another part of our area where there's a Labour mayor, presumably, rather than anything else, to do that work there too. So you spread good practice and you also learn about challenges, because not everything works. And, as you heard me say earlier, you've got to learn from mistakes as well as successes. Then in terms of housing and stuff, but also electorally, because I'm always used to fighting very marginal seats, never straightforward seats or easy streets. So every issue counts. I think we've got to be really careful about the green belt. Yes, there is all sorts of green belt that is in a good place and in a bad place. And by what do I mean by that? Well, any of you who know my region know that north of Bristol there's a very large motorway interchange called the Almondsbury interchange, where the M4, M5 intersect. All around there pretty much is green belt, yet it's a motorway, it's in bad shape. There's even a helicopter landing pad on that green belt. That clearly isn't land that's worth protecting now. Since 1948, it's changed. There's been a kind of erosion of what it originally was. Yet in other parts of the west of England, which has some of the most irreplaceable and beautiful countryside anywhere in the country, there is no protection. So if we are going to build on the green belt that is appropriate to now build on, because we do need to build those homes and other things, what I would say is that we should not lose a square inch of green belt across the whole of the area in question. So we should redesignate stuff that we want to protect in future as a green belt. And that then stops the Tories, because this is what they always do. They talk about NIMBYism and all this kind of thing, and they hassle us saying we don't care about the countryside, we'll concrete all over it. It gives us an answer to say the green belt is going to stay exactly the same in terms of area, but it's going to be even more relevant and protecting our irreplaceable countryside even more. And then the other thing I was going to say was, when I first became an environment minister, I don't know how long ago, it was 14 years ago or whatever it was, my officials told me some interesting things. And one of the things that I remember they told me that profoundly affected me actually was that if you are asked to, if you've heard me ask you this before, don't join in. But for people who haven't heard this before, please join in. In the history of the planet, which countries do you think have produced the most CO2 emissions? So since the beginning of time, which nations have produced the most? Okay, what's that, number one? Okay, who else after that? Okay, China. Anyone else? Okay, Britain. Who else? France. Yeah. Belgium, did you say? Canada. Okay. Yes, you at the back. Germany. Okay. The answer when I was given this information 13 years ago in order is USA first. So prize for whoever said that. Well done. But the second place was the UK, which makes up 0.05 of the land mass of the planet. Yet it was the second biggest CO2 emitter in the history of the planet, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. So what that tells me, and that gentleman saying he doesn't agree with the figure, well, we can argue about the figure if you want, but look, what I'd say is we've contributed a lot, however you see it. And what I'd simply say is I think that shows we have moral leadership in the world. We have a history of an empire that is questionable and a Commonwealth which is probably also questionable in some ways. But what it means is we have unique connections and history around the world with which to have a discourse and try and influence events for the future. But that is undermined when it comes to the climate emergency unless we put our own house in order. So it's not just about what we do, because you sometimes hear the Tories saying, well, it'll make no difference, we're so small and all that. That is irrelevant. What matters is our historic part in all this. Admittedly, we didn't know what CO2 did when we had our industrial revolution, but we certainly know now. And the only way we can be credible in the world, not just for the right reasons to help the planet, but actually because it will create an awful lot of jobs for our country as we use our skills and technologies around the of what Sunak has done and exactly what Keir Starmer was saying today. We've got to accelerate ahead on that. Really, really important.
Thank you, Dan. Any quick observations you want to add, Sam? Because I'm also conscious to get another round of questions in, and then I'll ask Katie and Jen.
I just wanted to talk about, sorry, is that working? To Helen about the reuse schemes. I mean, clearly, you know, the voluntary and charitable sector is stepping into this space, and it's how you, I'm not sure how you would legislate for that. Although, having said that, my colleague Mike Amesbury took a private member's bill through requiring school uniform to be generic, which would definitely support the reuse agenda. Some schools are still not doing it. We've veered slightly off the nature biodiversity issue, but it's I really support Mike in that, and I think it's in terms of badgers. Yes, Cheshire has been vaccinating badgers. It's across the two local authorities, I think. I'm looking at Sam, he's nodding. Excellent. Long may it continue. And then on house building, I think what was really encouraging from Keir's speech today was about developers honouring their commitment in terms of Section 106. And I don't think this should just apply to affordable housing. It absolutely has to apply to affordable housing, but also net gain. There is a whole industry devoted to enabling developers to avoid paying Section 106. That's wrong. It's a really perverse industry that has grown up out of profit. It's profitable to avoid employing somebody to advise you how to get out of a Section 106 agreement. I think that's completely wrong, and I hope that Keir's announcements today will avoid us heading down that direction.
Thank you, Sam. Kate.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on the housing question, and I feel like Dan started another question. I just want to carry on, so we'll just pivot from that. So Amy from Shipley, in terms of housing, I think there's a few things that need to be done. You're right, it's a tension. There's going to be quite a lot of tensions on this transition. And I think actually what I felt today was we were starting to address some of those and say there is going to be challenges. We're going to have to work together and there's going to have to be amendments. But I think to start off with, first of all, we want to be building good quality houses. We've got a partnership with Scottish Power, and I think they find it incredibly frustrating that they're having to go into brand new homes, drill up concrete floors to retrofit heat pumps. I mean, it's absolute nonsense. And I think, in terms of, we had the Conservative Zone advisor saying that it was one of the biggest scandals that they had undermined the standard. Really good quality. In terms of doing that, we also need to make sure that in the areas that aren't being built on, we are massive restoration. Our national parks are pretty barren. For someone who lives close to the Yorkshire Dales, absolutely beautiful, but it is a bit of a desert when it comes to biodiversity. And how do we look at having restoration in the areas where we won't be having house building? So we are having that more balanced approach. And as I said, I think there is an argument for more strategic land planning, which sounds a bit dull, but actually is what we need to do, is think about across the country where we are going to be having development, which we need, and we do need homes. We also need more onshore wind and more power stations and changes to the grid. We're going to have to be looking again at how we can balance that out and how we make sure that we're we're delivering on all of our outcomes. Just one more quick thing in terms of the role of
I
the
wasn't coughing at you.
Oh, I
sorry.
thought you were.
But I can give you 1 minute. and that's
Okay,
it.
the role of the UK, because I think Dan made a very compelling case about our historic responsibility and our moral responsibility. I just want to make one more case. It's also about our footprint. The way we measure our emissions and our impact is what happens within this nation state boundary. Well, this won't have been made here. This won't have been made here. The food you ate for lunch, some of it won't have been made here. That's all on somebody else's bill. That's all on somebody else's tally. So actually, if you think about the footprint of the UK, be the city of London, be it our consumption, it's far more than the figures that Nigel Farage likes to quote to us. So to make sure that we take in full account, and I have to say, I was embarrassed that for the first time in a decade, this Prime Minister didn't even show up at the UN General Assembly. So I hope next year we're going to have a Prime Minister leadership.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to do a chair's prerogative thing. I'm going to let Jen answer the questions we've already had. I'm going to ask, partly because of the time and partly because of the nature of the challenge we're dealing with. This is intergenerational. I'd like some questions, or a couple, from people who are under 35. You can define your own age. So I've seen a few people. I will come to, yes, indeed. Jen.
Okay, so Katie's turned the tables on me and picked up on a lot of the points that I was going to make. So this idea of our consumption-based society and how we offshore some of our impacts is really, really important. When you look at deforestation around the world, that is being driven by agriculture and manufacturing of products and mining of materials for the products that we use. Yeah. We're all using forest risk commodities, and I'd encourage everybody to look at what you're buying and to consider where that comes from. On the housing issue, Katie's absolutely right. The standards of housing developments in this country are appalling, and they are not to a net zero standard. The retrofit mountain we have to climb is enormous, and adding to that with new builds that aren't up to standard is just not acceptable. Pivoting off a point that Ruth made around the Environment Agency, a lot of this is around having the right voice in the room. So we don't have that one strong environmental body who stands up for this. We have a lot of environmental voices who are not necessarily, joining as one. If we look at the way the housing industry ability to influence our planning policies to their advantage, and what we need to be able to see is the counteraction to that from the environment groups, where we are, we have a voice at that table, but we also have really effective regulation. And Ruth, you mentioned chronic underfunding of the Environment Agency. Just to give a flag to Natural England, who are the nature conservation body in England, but also to give a shout out to the devolved nations, because environment is a devolved matter and they each have their own agencies who will be driving that forward. And one last thing, just coming back to Chester Zoo being a large organisation, every year we have a sustainable supply chain day with our suppliers. And one of the things I would say on the waste issue is that our suppliers are standing waiting to deliver against waste legislation, but when policy keeps changing, they lose their confidence and they just step back from it. So one of the things we discuss every year is this need for policy certainty for us to deliver sustainable supply chains around Chester Zoo as a business.
Thank you. That was good.
Hiya.
Would you like to say who you are and if you represent anything?
Yeah, I'm Helena Horsner from The Guardian. I'm 29. Thank you. My question's mainly for Ruth, but good to hear other people's views as well. Natural England have got a beaver licensing release program ready for sign-off, but Therese Coffey's refusing to sign off on it. Will Labour sign off on beaver releases? Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, two along from you. You'd like to say who you are, sir?
Thanks. I'm Oliver from 0 Hour. I'm 34. We're the cross-party campaign for the Climate and Ecology Bill. We think that Labour has an opportunity to repeat the success and the leadership of the Climate Change Act, but by bringing these two topics together, farming within nature and climate together. Ruth has very, very, very well already said that Labour will deliver a joined-up science-led plan on climate and nature. That's fantastic. What do the panel think about the role of legislation in this?
Oh,
It's not just about action, but legislation can drive that.
thank you. And the young lady over there with glasses.
Hi, I'm Rachel from the British Soft Drink Association. As you mentioned before, Ruth, with relation to the deposit return scheme, that's something that we're
You
really
might have
trying.
to speak up a bit, Rachel.
Can you hear me better now?
Can we turn that mic up a bit more?
Yeah. There we go. So as you mentioned before, Ruth, with the deposit return scheme, that's something we're really trying to make a reality. And we've kind of been trying to get in contact with your office for a while to arrange a site visit. So not really a question, but more so if we'd be able to, get.
Would you like a visit? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll sort that one
Arranged.
Does the lady, the woman next to you, also have a question? Because if you do have a question, fire away quickly, and that'll be
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. And we've been waiting for secondary regulation so that we can bring into force our forest risk commodity trade due diligence system.
Yep.
I'd love to know if Labour intends to regulate all forest risk commodities from the outset, as they have done in the EU's regulation, because that's what British retailers are crying out for.
Panelists, perhaps I will start with Katie, and then Jen, and then the politicians. I don't think it's fair or practical to expect Labour politicians in this room to come up with the policy answers that haven't been come up with in that big room over there. But we will take them away. But I think there's a really important sense of what's the role of legislation in the first place and how other things. So you haven't legislated for your baby bus or your birthday bus. So tools and levers, how does that work? Hopefully, Katie, that's given you a moment, because I suspect you've got at least some of the answers Labour should adopt. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick on one, because there's lots of us and lots of great questions on the role of legislation. Look, I think, we sit and look back on 13 years and see what stood the test of time. The Climate Change Act has stood the test of time. And if it wasn't for the Act, then the last 2 weeks ago, when Rishi Sunak stood up and said he was announcing his 7 bins and everything else, he would have gone further. He definitely would have gone further, but the Climate Change Act held it up. And actually, he hasn't been able to. He's made some amendments to the policies, which I think is unhelpful, but he hasn't been able to pull it out, pull the rug out of action in terms of climate change. So I very much agree with you that we need to make sure now we have far more comprehensive legislation on nature. And I think bringing the two sides of the coin together is definitely something that Labour could step into. There's a big vacuum there in terms of doing it. As I said many landscapes have got to deal with this, whether it's in Latin America or in the Congo Basin. We have to look at how we manage those multiple pressures together. Nobody's done it. Can we at least try and be a beacon for doing that here in the UK? So definitely legislation framework for me is a good way forward. With lots of ideas on that. I'll leave the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Katie. Jen.
Thanks very much. I'm going to pivot off that question around legislation as well. So I think it's absolutely essential for driving action. I'm a passionate advocate for empowering people and societal change and behaviour change, but there are some things that are going to be unpleasant, unpalatable, but absolutely necessary. And there will be some things that we need to legislate for. There will also be groups who don't want to go on this journey with us, probably because of profit. And they will have to be pulled along through legislation. I'd love to give a shout out to the public affairs team from Chester Zoo, who do incredible work working with government, influencing through consultation responses. It's one of the critical ways that we as an organisation can influence the way things happen in this country. We aren't a regulator. We can't step in on decision making. We're not elected politicians. So legislation and the development of policy and legislation is one of the key ways that everybody gets to have a part in democracy and how we're run as a country beyond the votes that you get to make. The other thing I would come back on, the secondary legislation around deforestation-free commodities, absolutely essential that the next government is very, very firm around bringing that secondary legislation forward. In terms of the approach that the EU are taking, that it does come with its own challenges in terms of the knock-on effects it has on different markets. And so At Chester Zoo, we are passionate advocates. You know, we're world leaders working on sustainable palm oil to other forest risk commodities. So we're taking a very keen interest in government consultations around those matters and really looking into what will work for us.
Thank you. Dan.
Thank you, Hugh. Well, I'd say that the climate emergency is so serious that we don't want to rely on any one thing. So, yes, legislation is clearly needed in some instances, and we need to get on with that. I'm not responsible for that, I'm pleased to say, at the moment. So I don't have to talk about that anymore. But what I would like to see is some tax incentives for businesses that do the right thing when it comes to the environment. Make it good for business so that it can be successful. It does environmentally sustainable things, so that that can be as an encouragement for other businesses to do the same, and a disincentive for those who are doing the wrong things. I think that would be very, very useful. I also think we've got to use soft power a bit along the lines I was talking about, that moral leadership. That's why it's important, because you need to persuade in every possible way, and who knows what ways are needed, because the world's a complicated and difficult place. So you need to have every option in your armory. I think that's all I'd say. And in terms of what I do, well, I make decisions, but the thing is, what politicians and people need to understand is that democracy is an amazing thing. And the less legislation you can have where you just say, look, over to you, politician, this is your objective, and we'll judge you harshly or well come the election, isn't a bad thing. That's what it's kind of meant to be, really, because otherwise you end up spending all your time and energy going through every line of a bill or whatever. And actually, you'd be better off getting on with, finding out what really works and what makes a difference. So it's horses for courses, really. But there you are.
Thank you, Dan. Sam.
I'm just very relieved that Ruth is now sitting on the left of me to answer the difficult questions. But as a newly elected MP, with the privilege of representing a constituency that has champions like Chester Zoo in it, I would just say that for me, it's really important to champion the voices that aren't heard in. As I have, how incoherent government policy is on this subject. It's sort of piecemeal, random bits of debate, and I'm sure that coherence is in sight.
Thank you. And Ruth.
Thank you very much. And there's so many bits I could take the next 3 hours to talk about this, but I won't, I promise.
1.5 minutes.
Oh, sad. Okay, really important. I mean, the legislation, let's remember the climate emergency was declared as a result of a Labour Party Opposition Day debate. That was the only reason the Tories actually called it. We shamed them into it. They wouldn't have done it otherwise. And I know why, because I made my maiden speech during that debate. So Greta Thunberg had just spoken, and boy, was that powerful. Really, really important. We acted, they were shamed into it. So never let them be, claim that they've got the moral high ground there. Absolutely not. In terms of taxes and things like that, yes, things like the EPR, the industry stepping up, they want to play their part, but they need to know. They need to know where the data is, how much it's going to cost, and they need certainty. We've already talked about business certainty. If you part, but it wants to know where it's going in all of this. And in terms of Dan, communication is so key. I mean, I can pontificate and I go, oh, this is great. We should be doing this particular recycle system. But I need to talk to local authorities. I need to talk to local people on the ground, because what works in one area may not work in another. So I am committed to talking to people across England and obviously Wales and Scotland as well, and Northern Ireland, to make sure we've got sensible integration, but to make sure the systems work where they are. Because if you're in a high-rise block of flats, that's a very different call to, say, somebody on a rural farm. That's really important. In terms of the beavers, I'm going to come back to you on the beavers, because that's a specific niche issue and I don't want to get it wrong today in front of you. So let me come back to that. In terms of the climate emergency, I was sat on a panel yesterday morning with Olivia Blake, who's got yesterday morning, and it's really important that we take these things forward. I don't want to do piecemeal. I want joined up, as Sam said. We do some really weird things at the moment. I want joined up legislation, and it's really important that things like the Environment Act, which hasn't got the teeth it needs, we need to be driving forward and making sure that standards are written into things so people can measure performance against those things. Because after all, election. It can't come soon enough for us because the planet can't wait.
Thank you, Ruth. So I'm going to ask you to show your appreciation to our panelists in a moment, but let's go back to what Ruth has just finished with. As Dan rightly pointed out, at least a significant action you can take is to vote Labour. But you can't vote Labour for a while, so have a think about at least one other action you might take before you get to vote Labour. That could be organising, it could be, doing, Labour doorstep stuff. But the two, you could join Sarah as these. So the two I was going to pick up out of the conversation we've had here, actually there's perhaps three. One is you could visit Chester Zoo.
Yes.
There's definitely something about how you relate to, speak about, and in a sense, honour nature in everything you do. How do you talk about it? What's important to you? Falling in love with nature. How do people know that's where you're at? And then I go back to my other little point. Too many politicians don't have enough friends. They don't have enough friends who know what a bee is, or a bumblebee and a solitary bee are. And if you're that sort of person, as in you're friendly, you don't have to know about bees, but you have to be friendly, make friends, because they'll need all the support you can give them. Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Hope you have a nice rest of your day. There'll be another session in here about fossil fuel treaties in about 25 minutes.
Sorry again about coming in and